The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Dr. Grace Ndovu knelt beside the murky water, her latex-gloved hands steady as she lowered the sterile collection bottle into the stream. The water gurgled softly around the glass container, its surface reflecting the concerned expression on her dark face. She had been monitoring this particular section for 3 weeks now, ever since the initial tests revealed elevated levels of industrial runoff that could threaten the entire city's water supply. Grace adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and made another notation on her waterproof clipboard. The data was troubling, but not unexpected. As the city's lead environmental engineer and the architect behind the award-winning water purification system that had earned national recognition, she understood better than anyone how delicate the balance was between progress and preservation. Her PhD in environmental engineering from MIT and 15 years of experience had taught her that water didn't recognize political boundaries or social hierarchies. It simply flowed, carrying with it whatever mankind chose to dump into its path. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and Grace breathed deeply as she sealed the sample container with practiced efficiency. Her sampling kit, a sophisticated array of instruments worth thousands of dollars, lay spread across a waterproof tarp beside her. Each tool had its purpose, each measurement its significance in the larger picture of environmental health that she had dedicated her life to protecting. She was reaching for her pH meter when the sharp crack of footsteps on gravel made her look up. A woman in a police uniform was striding toward her, with the kind of determined gait that Grace had learned to recognize as trouble. The officer's hand rested casually on her service weapon, her pale face set in an expression of suspicion that seemed entirely disproportionate to the peaceful morning scene. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" The voice was sharp, authoritative, with the kind of edge that brooked no argument. Officer Karen Mitchell, according to her name tag, stood with her feet planted wide, her pale blue eyes scanning the scientific equipment with obvious distrust. Grace looked up calmly, her hands still holding the pH meter. "Good morning, Officer. I'm Dr. Grace Ndovu with the City Environmental Department. I'm conducting routine water quality testing as part of our ongoing monitoring program." She gestured toward her identification badge, which hung clearly visible from a lanyard around her neck. Karen's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. "That's suspicious activity if I've ever seen it. You can't just go around tampering with the city's water supply. This is a public park, not some kind of laboratory." The accusation hit Grace like a physical blow. In all her years of conducting field research, she had encountered skepticism, curiosity, even indifference, but never outright hostility for doing her job. "Officer Mitchell, I'm not tampering with anything. I'm testing the water to ensure it's safe for the community. This is standard environmental monitoring that's required by both state and federal regulations." "I don't care what you call it." Karen's voice rose, causing a nearby jogger to slow and stare. "You're messing with public property, and that's illegal. I'm going to need you to pack up all this stuff and move along, right now." Grace felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady and professional. "Officer, I have all the necessary permits for this work. The City Council specifically approved this monitoring program after concerns were raised about industrial pollution upstream. I can show you my authorization if you'd like to see it." She reached slowly for her document folder, but Karen's hand moved instinctively to her weapon. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them. You people always have some kind of story, some kind of excuse for being where you don't belong." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Grace felt the familiar weight of racial prejudice settling on her shoulders, the same burden she had carried through graduate school, through job interviews, through countless professional interactions where her expertise was questioned not because of its merit, but because of the color of her skin. "You people," Grace repeated quietly, her voice carrying a note of steel that hadn't been there before. "Officer Mitchell, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Dr. Grayson Dovu, and I designed the water treatment system that serves this entire city. I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I have every legal right to be here." Karen's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Right. And I'm the mayor. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it ends now. You're going to pack up all this equipment, and you're going to do it fast, or I'm going to arrest you for tampering with public utilities." Grace stood slowly, her full height bringing her nearly eye to eye with the officer. "Officer Mitchell, I strongly suggest you contact your supervisor before this situation escalates further. I am conducting authorized scientific work that is vital to public health and safety. Interfering with this work could expose the entire city to serious health risks." "Are you threatening me?" Karen's voice had reached a dangerous pitch, attracting the attention of more park visitors. A small crowd was beginning to form at a respectful distance, phones emerging from pockets as people sensed the developing drama. "I'm not threatening anyone," Grace replied firmly. "I'm trying to do my job, which is protecting the water supply that serves 300,000 residents of this city. Every day I don't complete this testing is another day that potential contaminants could be flowing into homes, schools, and hospitals." Karen keyed her radio with sharp, angry movements. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at Riverside Park. I've got a suspicious individual interfering with public utilities. Possible eco-terrorism situation." The word eco-terrorism sent a chill through Grace's professional composure. She had seen colleagues falsely accused, careers destroyed by baseless suspicions, brilliant minds silenced by prejudice, disguised as security concerns. The very work that made communities safer was being twisted into something sinister by an officer who seemed determined to see threat where none existed. "Officer, please listen to me," Grace said, her voice taking on the patience she usually reserved for explaining complex environmental concepts to city council members. "I understand this might look unusual to someone not familiar with environmental monitoring, but this is standard procedure. I have water samples from 12 different locations around the city, all taken with proper authorization. I can show you my permits, my identification, my city employee credentials. I don't want to see anything from you except the back of your head as you walk away from here." Karen snapped. "You've got exactly 60 seconds to pack up and leave, or you're going downtown in handcuffs." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air, and Grace felt her heart sink. What should have been a routine morning of scientific work was spiraling into a public spectacle that could damage not just her reputation, but the entire environmental monitoring program she had fought so hard to establish. 2 additional patrol cars pulled into the park's parking area, their red and blue lights casting an ominous glow across the peaceful scene. Officers emerged with the kind of urgent energy usually reserved for actual emergencies, their hands resting on their weapons as they approached the confrontation. "What's the situation, Mitchell?" The lead officer, a graying man with sergeant's stripes, approached with cautious authority. "Sergeant Davis, I caught this individual tampering with the water supply. She's got all kinds of suspicious equipment, and she's been taking samples from multiple locations around the city. Claims to be some kind of scientist. But you know how these environmental extremists operate." Grace stepped forward, her credentials clearly visible. "Sergeant Davis, I'm Dr. Grayson Dovu, Environmental Engineering Director for the City of Millbrook. I'm conducting routine water quality monitoring under permits issued by the City Council and the State Environmental Protection Agency. This is a serious misunderstanding that's preventing me from doing work that's critical to public health. Sergeant Davis studied her carefully, his experienced eyes taking in the professional equipment, the official identification, the calm demeanor that spoke of education and authority. Dr. Ndovu, can you show me your authorization for this work? Grace nodded gratefully and reached for her document folder, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any misinterpretation of her actions. Of course, Sergeant. Here are my permits, my employee identification, and the specific authorization for today's sampling locations. As Sergeant Davis examined the documents, Karen's face flushed with growing agitation. Sergeant, you can't just take her word for it. Anyone can fake documents these days. We need to verify this through proper channels before we let her continue contaminating our water supply. Contaminating. Grace's professional composure finally cracked, and her voice carried 15 years of frustration with ignorance masquerading as authority. Officer Mitchell, I have spent my entire career protecting water supplies. I have published over 30 peer-reviewed papers on water treatment technology. I hold patents on purification systems used in 7 states. The very water you drink every day at home goes through treatment plants that I designed. How exactly am I contaminating anything? The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and several people were now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. The morning joggers had been joined by dog walkers, families with children, and curious residents drawn by the unusual spectacle of police cars in their peaceful park. Karen's face grew redder as she sensed the crowd's growing sympathy for Grace. I don't care what pieces of paper she's waving around. This is clearly some kind of setup. Environmental terrorists always have elaborate cover stories. We need to confiscate all this equipment and take her in for questioning. Grace felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. How many brilliant minds had been silenced by suspicion? How many critical discoveries had been delayed by prejudice? She thought of her grandmother, who had cleaned buildings at night so Grace's mother could attend college. She thought of her mother, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for Grace's education. She thought of all the young girls who looked like her, who might see this moment and decide that science wasn't for them after all. Officer Mitchell, Grace said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from absolute certainty. I understand that you don't recognize me or my work, but before you destroy a career that has been dedicated to protecting public health, before you undermine an environmental monitoring program that could prevent the next Flint water crisis, I suggest you make one phone call. Who am I supposed to call? Karen demanded, her hand still hovering near her handcuffs. Call Mayor Henderson. Call the city engineer. Call the Environmental Protection Agency. Call anyone who understands that clean water doesn't just happen by accident. It requires constant vigilance, scientific expertise, and people who are willing to get their hands dirty in service of their community. Sergeant Davis looked up from the documents he had been studying, his expression thoughtful. Mitchell, these permits look legitimate, and this identification matches the photo. Dr. Ndovu, can you explain exactly what you're testing for here? Grace nodded, grateful for the opportunity to shift the conversation back to science. We've detected elevated levels of industrial compounds upstream from this location. I'm conducting a comprehensive analysis to determine the source, the extent of contamination, and the potential impact on the city's water treatment system. This particular sampling point feeds into the primary intake for our main treatment facility. And how long have you been doing this type of work? Sergeant Davis asked, his tone now more curious than suspicious. 15 years professionally, but I've been passionate about water quality since I was 12 years old, and my family got sick from contaminated well water in rural Georgia. I earned my PhD from MIT specifically to prevent other families from going through what we experienced. Karen's radio crackled to life, interrupting the conversation. Unit 47, be advised that we've received multiple calls from City Hall regarding the incident at Riverside Park. Mayor Henderson is en route to your location. The color drained from Karen's face as she realized the magnitude of the situation she had created. Mayor Henderson. Why would the mayor be coming here? Grace allowed herself a small smile. Because, Officer Mitchell, the mayor takes water quality very seriously, especially when that work is being conducted by the person who designed the system that won the State Environmental Excellence Award 3 years running. The sound of additional vehicles arriving drew everyone's attention to the parking area. A black sedan, with city government plates, pulled up beside the patrol cars, followed by a white van marked Channel 7 News. Grace recognized the sedan immediately as Mayor Henderson's official vehicle. But the news van was an unwelcome surprise. Mayor Henderson emerged from the sedan with the kind of purposeful stride that had carried him through 20 years of public service. A tall, distinguished man in his 50s. He had the ability to command attention simply by entering a space. Behind him came Dr. Michael Torres, the city's chief engineer, and Sarah Chen, the director of public health. Dr. Ndovu. Mayor Henderson's voice carried clearly across the park as he approached the group. I hope there hasn't been any interference with your critical work here. The City Council is very eager to receive your findings on the upstream contamination issue. The mayor's words hit the assembled group like a thunderbolt. Karen's face went pale as she realized the full scope of her mistake. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Grace stepped forward to greet the mayor, her professional composure fully restored. Good morning, Mayor Henderson, Dr. Torres, Ms. Chen. I'm afraid there has been some confusion about the nature of my work here. Officer Mitchell seemed to believe I was engaged in some form of vandalism rather than environmental monitoring. Mayor Henderson turned to look at Karen with the kind of expression usually reserved for major public relations disasters. Officer Mitchell, can you explain to me why you interfered with Dr. Ndovu's authorized environmental testing? Do you understand that this work is essential to protecting the health and safety of every resident in our city? Karen's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sir, I thought she was suspicious. I didn't know she was. I thought she might be tampering with the water supply. Tampering. Dr. Torres stepped forward, his voice carrying the incredulity of a man who had worked closely with Grace for over a decade. Officer, Dr. Ndovu is one of the most respected environmental engineers in the country. She has literally written the textbook on municipal water treatment. Universities across the nation use her research as the foundation for their environmental engineering programs. Sarah Chen added her voice to the chorus of support. Dr. Ndovu's monitoring program has already identified 3 potential contamination sources this year alone. Her work has prevented what could have been a public health catastrophe affecting hundreds of thousands of people. The news crew had set up their camera and was now recording the entire exchange. Grace recognized the reporter, Janet Williams, a veteran journalist who had covered environmental issues for over 20 years. The presence of the media added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Janet Williams approached with her microphone, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. Dr. Ndovu, can you comment on what happened here this morning? Were you prevented from conducting your environmental monitoring work? Grace looked directly into the camera, her scientist's mind understanding the importance of clear, factual communication. This morning, while conducting routine water quality testing, authorized by the City Council and required by state environmental regulations. I was confronted by Officer Mitchell, who threatened to arrest me for what she termed eco-terrorism, despite showing proper identification and permits. I was told that my scientific work was suspicious and that I needed to leave immediately. The reporter turned to Karen, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Officer Mitchell, can you explain your actions this morning? Why did you believe Dr. Ndovu's authorized work was suspicious? Karen's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. I was just doing my job, protecting public safety. I thought. You thought what? Exactly, Janet Williams pressed, her journalistic instincts recognizing a story that would resonate far beyond the local community. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. Everyone present understood that Karen's incomplete answer spoke volumes about the assumptions and prejudices that had driven her actions. Mayor Henderson stepped forward, his political instincts guiding him toward damage control. What's important now is that Dr. Ndovu can continue her vital work without further interference. The city owes her an apology for this unfortunate misunderstanding. But Grace shook her head, her voice carrying the weight of years of similar misunderstandings. Mayor Henderson, with respect, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling, pure and simple. Officer Mitchell didn't see a PhD scientist with proper authorization conducting legally mandated environmental monitoring. She saw a black woman with expensive equipment in a public park, and she immediately assumed criminal intent. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation fell silent as Grace's words cut through the morning air. The truth of her statement was undeniable, hanging over the scene like a cloud that couldn't be wished away. Karen's face crumpled as the full weight of her actions hit her. I didn't mean. I was just trying to do my job. I thought. You thought that a black woman couldn't possibly be a legitimate scientist. Grace finished quietly. You thought that expensive scientific equipment in the hands of someone who looks like me must be evidence of criminal activity. You thought that 15 years of education and experience were less credible than your immediate assumption of guilt. Dr. Torres stepped closer to Grace, his voice filled with the indignation of a colleague and friend. Dr. Ndovu, everyone in the environmental engineering community knows your work. Your research on bioremediation has been cited in over 200 peer-reviewed papers. You've consulted for the EPA on water crisis response. You've literally saved lives with your innovations. Sarah Chen nodded emphatically. The water treatment protocol Dr. Ndovu developed has been adopted by 12 cities across the Southeast. When Nashville had their contamination crisis 2 years ago, they called Grace. When Atlanta's system was failing, they called Grace. She's not just a local scientist. She's a national resource. Janet Williams continued recording, recognizing that this story was evolving into something much larger than a simple misunderstanding. Dr. Ndovu, how do you feel about the assumption that your presence here was automatically suspicious? Grace looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at Officer Mitchell's stricken face, and felt the weight of representation settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every scientist of color who had faced similar suspicions. Every professional who had been judged by appearance rather than accomplishment. I feel tired, she said simply. Tired of having to prove my legitimacy over and over again. Tired of being seen as suspicious for doing the same work that my white colleagues do without question. Tired of living in a world where a police officer's uninformed assumptions can threaten not just my career, but the public health work that protects entire communities. The power of her words rippled through the crowd. Several people began clapping, and soon the applause spread until it filled the park. Grace felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that her community was rallying around her, understanding the larger implications of what had happened. Mayor Henderson raised his hand for quiet. Dr. Ndovu, on behalf of the city, I want to publicly apologize for the treatment you received this morning. This incident is unacceptable and does not reflect the values of our community or our commitment to supporting the scientific work that keeps our citizens safe. Sergeant Davis stepped forward, his face grave. Officer Mitchell, you need to come with me. There's going to be a full investigation into this incident, and I suspect there will be serious consequences for your actions today. Karen's eyes filled with tears as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. Dr. Ndovu, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Grace looked at the young officer, seeing not just the person who had wronged her, but a symbol of the systemic problems that plagued their society. Officer Mitchell, your apology is noted, but apologies don't undo the damage of racial profiling. They don't restore the time lost from critical environmental monitoring, and they don't prevent the next scientist of color from facing the same baseless suspicions. The news reporter seized on the moment. Dr. Ndovu, what do you think needs to change to prevent incidents like this in the future? Grace straightened to her full height, her voice carrying the authority of education, experience, and moral certainty. We need comprehensive bias training for law enforcement officers. We need clear protocols for interacting with scientists and researchers conducting authorized work in public spaces. Most importantly, we need to examine our assumptions about who belongs in scientific and professional roles. She gestured toward her equipment, still spread across the tarp beside the stream. This work I'm doing isn't glamorous. It's not exciting. It's careful, methodical, scientifically rigorous monitoring that protects public health. It requires years of education, ongoing training, and dedication to serving others. The fact that Officer Mitchell couldn't imagine a black woman in this role says more about our society's limitations than it does about my qualifications. Dr. Torres picked up one of Grace's sampling containers, holding it up for the cameras. This single water sample could reveal contamination that affects hundreds of thousands of people. Dr. Ndovu's work is literally life and death important. Interfering with it isn't just wrong, it's dangerous to public health. Mayor Henderson nodded gravely, which is why the city will be implementing new protocols immediately. All city employees, including law enforcement, will receive training on recognizing and supporting authorized scientific work. We will also be establishing clear identification procedures for researchers working in public spaces. Janet Williams turned back to Grace. Dr. Ndovu, despite this morning's events, will you continue your environmental monitoring work? Grace smiled for the first time that morning, her love for her work shining through the frustration and anger. Of course I will. This community's water supply doesn't care about racial bias or professional prejudice. Contamination doesn't discriminate. My job is to protect public health, and I'll continue doing that job regardless of the obstacles some people choose to place in my path. She knelt back down beside the stream, her hands steady as she reached for another sampling container. Right now, I have 11 more sampling sites to visit today. Every hour of delay potentially means another hour of undetected contamination flowing through the system. The crowd began to disperse as Grace returned to her work, but many people lingered, watching with new understanding as she methodically collected samples and recorded data. Children pressed closer to their parents, asking questions about what the scientist was doing and why it was important. Sergeant Davis led Officer Mitchell away toward the patrol cars, but not before she turned back one more time. "Dr. Ndovu," she called out hesitantly. Grace looked up from her pH meter. "Yes, Officer Mitchell. Thank you for the work you do. I'm sorry I didn't understand." Grace nodded acknowledgement, but didn't smile. Understanding was good, but it came too late and at too high a cost. "Officer Mitchell, I hope you'll use this experience to be better, to see people for who they really are, rather than who you assume they must be." As the police cars pulled away, Mayor Henderson approached Grace one more time. "Dr. Ndovu, I want you to know that the City Council will be discussing this incident at our next meeting. We're committed to ensuring that this never happens again." Grace capped another sample container and labeled it carefully. "Mayor Henderson, I appreciate your support, but the real test isn't what you say in meetings. It's whether the next scientist of color who works in this park gets treated with professional respect or criminal suspicion." The news crew finished packing up their equipment, but Janet Williams lingered for one final question. "Dr. Ndovu, what would you want people to remember about today?" Grace stood up, her sampling work complete for this location. She looked out over the stream, its waters carrying both life and potential contamination toward the treatment plant she had designed. "I'd want them to remember that expertise comes in all colors. That scientific work often looks ordinary from the outside, but serves extraordinary purposes. And that we all have a responsibility to question our assumptions about who belongs in professional roles." She began packing her equipment with the same methodical care she brought to all her work. "Most importantly, I'd want them to remember that protecting public health requires not just good science, but good judgment. Today, poor judgment nearly interfered with work that protects hundreds of thousands of people. That's a luxury no community can afford." As Grace loaded her equipment into her official city vehicle, "Doctor," Torres walked beside her. "Grace, I'm proud of how you handled that situation. Your professionalism under pressure was remarkable." Grace paused in her loading. "Michael, I've been handling situations like this my entire career. The only difference today was that it happened in public, with cameras rolling. Most of the time, these confrontations happen in private, with no witnesses and no accountability." She closed the vehicle's trunk and looked back at the park, where families were beginning to return to their normal morning activities. That's what makes today significant. Not because racial profiling happened. It happens every day. But because it happened in the light, where everyone could see it for what it really was. "Dr." Torres shook his head sadly. "It shouldn't take a public spectacle for people to recognize your expertise and authority." "No, it shouldn't," Grace agreed. "But if that's what it takes to create change, then I'm glad it happened here, today, where it could be documented and discussed. Maybe the next young scientist of color won't face the same assumptions I did." She got into her vehicle, but rolled down the window. "I've got 10 more sampling sites to visit today. Michael, this work doesn't stop because one officer didn't understand its importance. The water doesn't care about bias. It just needs to be tested, treated, and protected." As Grace drove away to continue her environmental monitoring work, the park slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But the morning's events had planted seeds that would grow into something larger. By evening, the video of the confrontation had been shared thousands of times on social media. Environmental scientists across the country began sharing their own stories of being questioned, doubted, or dismissed while conducting legitimate professional work. The hashtag #JacraWaterGuardian began trending as people shared Grace's story and discussed the broader implications of racial bias in professional settings. University professors assigned the incident as a case study in their environmental justice courses. Police departments across the region began reviewing their protocols for interacting with scientific researchers in public spaces. 3 days later, the City Council held a special session to address the incident. The chamber was packed with environmental scientists, community activists, city employees, and concerned residents. Grace sat in the front row, still wearing her professional attire, but now recognized by everyone present as both an expert and a symbol of the challenges faced by professionals of color. Mayor Henderson opened the session with a formal apology and announcement of new policies designed to prevent similar incidents. Officer Mitchell had been suspended pending a full investigation, and all city law enforcement personnel would receive mandatory training on recognizing and supporting authorized scientific work. But the most significant moment came when the council announced that the city's water treatment facility would be renamed the Dr. Grace Ndovu Water Treatment Center, in recognition of her contributions to public health and environmental protection. The announcement brought the packed chamber to its feet in sustained applause. Grace stood to address the council, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I'm honored by this recognition, but I want to be clear about what it represents. This isn't just about me or my work. It's about ensuring that expertise is recognized regardless of who possesses it. It's about creating a community where scientific work is supported rather than suspected." She paused, looking out over the crowd of supporters. "The water treatment system that will bear my name serves everyone in this community equally. It doesn't care about race, economic status, or social position. It simply provides clean, safe water to everyone who turns on a tap. That's the kind of equity we should strive for in all our community interactions." The facility naming was scheduled for the following month, but Grace's work continued unchanged. She still collected water samples, analyzed contamination patterns, and designed improvements to the treatment system. The difference was that now, when she knelt beside streams and rivers with her scientific equipment, people approached with curiosity rather than suspicion. Children began recognizing her from news coverage and would ask their parents to stop so they could watch the water scientist at work. Grace started carrying extra sample containers and pH strips, turning these encounters into impromptu science lessons about water quality and environmental protection. On the day of the facility dedication ceremony, Grace stood before a crowd of hundreds as Mayor Henderson unveiled the new sign, Dr. Grace Ndovu Water Treatment Center. The facility that had once operated anonymously in the background of city life was now prominently identified with the scientist who had designed its innovative treatment protocols. In her dedication speech, Grace reflected on the journey from confrontation to recognition. 6 months ago, my presence at Riverside Park was seen as suspicious simply because I was a black woman with scientific equipment. Today, that same work is being celebrated as essential to our community's health and safety. What changed wasn't the work. It was the understanding. She gestured toward the treatment facility, its complex systems humming quietly as they processed millions of gallons of water. This facility will serve our community for decades to come. But its real legacy isn't the clean water it produces. It's the reminder that expertise and dedication come in all forms, and that our community is strongest when we recognize and support the contributions of all our members. The ceremony concluded with Grace leading tours of the facility, explaining the intricate processes that turned raw water into the clean, safe supply that flowed from every tap in the city. Visitors marveled at the complexity of the systems she had designed, the careful balance of chemistry and engineering that made modern life possible. As the sun set over the water treatment facility that now bore her name, Grace returned to her laboratory to analyze the day's samples. The work was the same as it had always been: methodical, careful, essential to public health. But now it was recognized, respected, and supported by a community that had learned to see past assumptions to the expertise underneath. The incident at Riverside Park had lasted only an hour, but its impact would be felt for years to come. Officer Mitchell, after completing bias training and community service, had requested reassignment to work with community environmental groups, determined to use her experience to bridge the gap between law enforcement and scientific communities. Grace continued her monitoring work, but now she also served as a mentor to young scientists of color, encouraging them to pursue careers in environmental protection despite the challenges they might face. She established a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in environmental engineering, ensuring that the next generation would have better opportunities than she had experienced. The water flowed on, carrying life through the city, treated and protected by systems designed with expertise and maintained with dedication. And at the heart of it all was the understanding that had been hard-won on a morning in Riverside Park, that protecting a community requires not just good science, but the wisdom to recognize and support the scientists who dedicate their lives to serving others. In the end, the true measure of Grace's impact wasn't found in the awards, recognition, or renamed facilities. It was in the countless people who turned on their taps each day and received clean, safe water without a second thought. Water that flowed because a dedicated scientist had refused to be deterred by prejudice, had continued her vital work despite obstacles, and had transformed a moment of bias into an opportunity for understanding and change. The Water Guardian had protected more than just the city's supply. She had protected the principle that expertise deserves recognition, that dedication deserves respect, and that communities are strongest when they embrace the contributions of all their members. In the steady flow of clean water through every pipe in the city, her legacy continued, drop by precious drop.